The clock on David's kitchen wall showed 11:47 p.m. when I realized everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie. My 8-year-old son Tommy stood in the doorway of what used to be our family home, wearing Batman pajamas that were too small for him, staring at me like I was a stranger who had just broken into his sanctuary. "Why are you here, Mom?" he whispered, and those 4 words hit me harder than any divorce papers ever could. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how Christmas Eve 2023 became the night I learned that sometimes the people we trust most are the ones planning our destruction, while we're busy trying to save what's left of our family. This is a story about midnight phone calls, frozen bank accounts, and the moment I had to choose between protecting our money and protecting our future, with 13 minutes to decide and everything I'd ever worked for hanging in the balance. My name is Sarah Chun, and 6 months ago, I thought I had the perfect plan to rebuild my marriage. David and I had been separated for 8 months, not officially divorced. Mind you, just taking what our couples therapist called intentional space to figure out if 12 years of marriage was worth fighting for. We still shared everything: our joint checking account, the mortgage on our 3-bedroom colonial in Westchester, and most importantly, custody of Tommy, who deserved better than watching his parents tear each other apart over dinner every night. The separation had been civil, almost businesslike, the kind of mature adult decision that looks good on paper but feels hollow in practice. David moved into a rental apartment 15 minutes away, a sterile 2-bedroom place with beige walls and furniture that looked like it came from a hotel liquidation sale. The rent was $2,400 a month, money we couldn't really afford to be spending on 2 households, but the alternative was continuing to live together. While our marriage slowly suffocated under the weight of unspoken resentments and careful politeness, we alternated weeks with Tommy, splitting holidays, sharing the financial responsibilities like the mature adults we were supposed to be. Our joint account had $47,000 in it, my inheritance from my grandmother's estate, David's bonus from his promotion to senior account manager at the marketing firm, and the savings we'd accumulated over years of careful budgeting and weekend farmers market trips. That money represented everything we'd built together: security, stability, and the promise that even if our marriage didn't survive, we could give Tommy a soft landing. That money was supposed to be our fresh start fund. Whether we worked things out or went our separate ways, it was our safety net, the buffer that would help us transition into whatever came next without destroying Tommy's stability or forcing him to change schools in the middle of 3rd grade. We'd agreed on this explicitly during one of our last productive conversations before David moved out. Neither of us would touch that money without consulting the other. It was the one thing we still trusted each other to protect. At least, that's what I believed until I saw the text message that changed everything. Christmas Eve had started normally enough, if anything about our new reality could be considered normal. I'd driven to David's apartment that morning to drop off Tommy's gifts, a ritual that still felt awkward and artificial 8 months after we'd started this dance of careful coordination. We'd agreed to do Christmas separately this year, alternating who got the actual holiday. It was David's turn, which meant I'd have Tommy for New Year's Eve, a trade-off that felt fair in the careful mathematics of our broken family. The gifts exchange had been particularly difficult this year. Tommy had made lists for both houses, trying to be fair about what he asked from each parent, and the thoughtfulness of it had nearly broken my heart. An 8-year-old shouldn't have to manage his parents' emotions about gift-giving, shouldn't have to worry about making one of us feel left out or less important. But there he was, carefully dividing his Christmas wishes between Mom's house and Dad's house, creating balance in a situation that was fundamentally unbalanced. I'd planned to spend the evening at my sister Lisa's house in Connecticut, drinking wine and pretending that watching other people's kids tear through wrapping paper didn't make my chest ache with longing for the Christmases we used to have. Lisa had invited her in-laws, which meant the house would be full of children and chaos and all the warm family energy I'd been missing for months. Her kids, Emma and Jake, were close to Tommy's age, and they'd always treated him like a beloved cousin during family gatherings. But as wonderful as Lisa's family was, Being there on Christmas Eve felt like watching someone else's life through a window, beautiful and warm, but fundamentally separate from my own experience. I'd spent most of the evening helping in the kitchen, grateful for tasks that kept my hands busy and my mind off the fact that my own family was spending Christmas apart for the first time in Tommy's life. At 11:30 p.m., as I sat in Lisa's guest bedroom scrolling through old photos of better Christmases, my phone buzzed with a bank alert I'd never seen before. Wire transfer pending approval, $47,000. Authorization required by 11:59 p.m. or transaction will autocomplete. Below that was a reference number, a routing number I didn't recognize, and the words that made my blood freeze. Transfer to First Republic Bank, escrow account, residential purchase. My hands started shaking before my brain fully processed what I was reading. We'd never set up any wire transfers. We barely talked about moving money anywhere, let alone nearly $50,000 on Christmas Eve. And what was this about a residential purchase? David hadn't mentioned anything about buying property. Hadn't even hinted at major purchases beyond his complaints about the cost of furnishing his rental apartment. I called David immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed his number. It rang 4 times before he answered, and I could hear the television in the background, probably watching one of those old Christmas movies he'd always loved. The ones where families magically reconciled just in time for the holiday. Sarah, what's wrong? It's almost midnight. David, did you authorize a wire transfer from our joint account? The bank is saying there's a pending transfer for our entire savings. There was a pause too long, the kind of silence that speaks louder than any confession. I could hear him moving around, probably stepping away from wherever Tommy might overhear the conversation. David? Look, Sarah, I can explain, but not over the phone. Can you come over? Come over? It's Christmas Eve, Tommy's asleep, and you're moving our money somewhere without telling me. What the hell is going on? Please, just come over. I'll explain everything, but you need to hear this in person. The desperation in his voice was unmistakable, but so was something else. Guilt, maybe, or fear. Whatever was happening, David knew it was big, and he knew I was going to be furious about it. David, I need to know right now. Did you buy something? Did you commit our money to something without talking to me first? Another long pause. Yes. But Sarah, it's not what you think. It's not frivolous or selfish. It's for us, for our family. I felt like the room was spinning. Our family? We're separated, David. We're probably getting divorced. What could you possibly have bought that's for our family? A house, he said quietly. I bought us a house. Against every instinct screaming in my head, I got dressed. Told Lisa I had to handle an emergency, which was the understatement of the century, and drove through empty streets decorated with twinkling lights and inflatable Santas to confront whatever disaster my marriage had become. The drive from Lisa's house in Connecticut to David's apartment in Westchester had never felt longer, every mile giving me more time to imagine what kind of catastrophic decision my husband had made with our life savings. The rental apartment complex looked different at night, stark and unwelcoming. The kind of place where people went to hide from their real lives. I'd always hated visiting David here, hated the way the place felt temporary and sad, like a waiting room for people whose real lives were happening somewhere else. But tonight it looked even worse, like a symbol of everything that had gone wrong between us. I knocked softly, not wanting to wake Tommy. David answered immediately, like he'd been waiting by the door. He looked terrible unshaven, wearing the same gray sweater he'd had on that morning, his hair sticking up like he'd been running his hands through it for hours. Behind him, I could see the television still playing It's a Wonderful Life, the irony of which was not lost on me. Sarah, thank God you're here. Come in, but quietly. Tommy's asleep. I stepped into the living room and immediately noticed something that made my stomach drop. There were moving boxes stacked against the far wall, labeled in David's careful handwriting. Kitchen, bedroom, office. The apartment I'd thought was temporary suddenly looked very permanent, or rather, very impermanent, like someone was preparing to leave. David, what are those boxes? And what's this about a wire transfer? He sat down heavily on the couch, not meeting my eyes. The coffee table was covered with papers, what looked like real estate documents, legal forms, inspection reports. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was something he'd been planning for weeks, maybe months. "I bought a house," he said again, his voice barely above a whisper. "You bought a house? When? How? With what money?" "With our money. The transfer is for the down payment. I close tomorrow. Well, today, technically. Christmas Day." I felt like the floor had tilted beneath me. "You bought a house with our savings? Without telling me? Are you completely insane? It's not what you think. It's for all of us. For you, me, and Tommy. It's bigger than this place. It has a real yard. Tommy could have his own playroom. David, we're separated. We're probably getting divorced. You can't just buy a house and decide we're moving in together like nothing happened." "But what if we don't get divorced?" he said, finally looking at me directly. "What if instead of spending money on lawyers and 2 separate households and all the logistics of splitting up our life, we spend it on something that could bring us back together?" Before I could respond, Tommy appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes and looking smaller than his 8 years. His Batman pajamas were the ones I'd bought him last Christmas. Back when we were still a family. Back when Christmas Eve meant the 3 of us assembling his presents together after he'd gone to sleep. "Why are you here, Mom? Dad said you were doing Christmas at Aunt Lisa's." My heart broke seeing him standing there, confused and sleepy, caught between parents who clearly had no idea what they were doing. David immediately went to him, kneeling down to Tommy's level with the gentle patience that had always made him a good father, even when he was failing at being a good husband. "Hey, buddy, Mom just came to talk to Dad about some grown-up stuff. Why don't you go back to bed? Santa's going to come soon." But why is Mom crying? I didn't even realize I was crying until Tommy pointed it out. I wiped my cheeks quickly, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. "I'm not crying, sweetheart. I'm just surprised to see you. Go back to bed, okay? We'll figure everything out in the morning." Tommy hugged me quickly, his small arms tight around my waist, and I caught the scent of his shampoo and the lingering smell of the hot chocolate David had obviously made him before bed. These were the moments that made the separation feel most unbearable, the casual intimacy of family life that we'd given up. The bedtime routines and midnight comfort that had once been as natural as breathing. "Will you still be here when I wake up?" Tommy asked, and the hope in his voice was devastating. I looked at David over Tommy's head, seeing my own uncertainty reflected in his eyes. "We'll see, baby. Now go back to sleep." Tommy padded back to his temporary bedroom, leaving David and me alone with the weight of what he'd done and the impossible decision I had to make in the next few minutes. "Sarah, listen to me. I know how this looks, but I had to move fast. This house had came on the market 3 weeks ago, way below market value because the sellers needed to move quickly for a job transfer. It's in the same school district as our old house, walking distance to the park where Tommy learned to ride his bike. It has 4 bedrooms, so we could each have our own space while we figure things out. And there's a workshop in the basement where I could finally set up that woodworking equipment I've been talking about for years. You bought a house without consulting me using money that belongs to both of us. How is that not exactly what it looks like, which is theft? It's not theft. We're still married. We're both on the account. And look, if you don't want to try living there, if you want to proceed with a divorce, you can have your half of the equity when we sell it. But Sarah, this could be our chance to start over properly, not in some cramped apartment or with you staying at Lisa's place indefinitely. A real home where Tommy doesn't have to keep packing a suitcase every week." I looked at the clock on his kitchen wall, 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes until the transfer would go through automatically, and our entire financial safety net would be gone, tied up in a house I'd never seen, in a decision I'd never been part of. "Show me the house listing," I said finally. David pulled out his phone, scrolling to his real estate app with the practiced motion of someone who'd been obsessing over this decision for weeks. The house was beautiful. I had to admit, a 1940s Cape Cod with original hardwood floors, updated kitchen, and a backyard that looked like something from a magazine. The listing price was indeed well below market value, and I could see why David had felt pressure to move quickly. In Westchester's competitive market, A house like this would normally have multiple offers within days, but that didn't change the fundamental problem, which wasn't the house itself, but what David's decision said about us, about trust, about the basic respect that should exist between two people trying to raise a child together. David, even if this house is perfect, even if it would be amazing for Tommy, you can't make unilateral decisions about our money and our future. That's not how marriage works. That's not how separation works. That's not how any of this works. I know I should have called you. But Sarah, I was afraid you'd say no before you really considered it. And I was afraid if we waited, if we went through the whole process of discussing and analyzing and second-guessing, we'd lose it, just like we've lost everything else by overthinking it to death. There was something in his voice, a desperation I hadn't heard since the night he'd moved out. For the first time in months, David sounded like the man I'd married, impulsive, hopeful, willing to take risks for the people he loved. It was the same quality that had made him plan elaborate surprise birthday parties and book spontaneous weekend trips to Vermont. It was also the same quality that had made him quit his stable job 3 years ago to start a consulting business that never quite got off the ground, putting us in the financial position that had contributed to the stress that had helped destroy our marriage in the first place. The clock showed 11:49 p.m. I need to see it, I said. I need to see this house before I decide whether to let this transfer go through. Sarah, it's almost midnight. The house is empty. It's dark. Then we'll turn on the lights. You have the keys, don't you? David stared at me, then nodded slowly. Yeah, I have the keys. Can someone watch Tommy? I called Mrs. Patterson next door earlier tonight, just in case. She said she'd keep an ear out if we needed to step out. Tommy's fast asleep, and her apartment shares a wall with this one. Mrs. Patterson was David's elderly neighbor, a retired teacher who'd become something of a surrogate grandmother to Tommy during the months David had lived here. She was the kind of person who always had homemade cookies in her kitchen and genuinely enjoyed having a child around to spoil. If anyone could be trusted to watch over a sleeping 8-year-old for an hour, it was her. 10 minutes later, we were driving through the quiet streets of Scarsdale, past houses glowing with Christmas lights and inflatable lawn decorations. The radio played soft jazz, and for a moment, it felt like old times, David driving, me in the passenger seat, both of us heading towards something uncertain but facing it together. We'd taken drives like this when we were dating, when the biggest decision we faced was where to go for dinner or which movie to see. Now we were driving toward a house that could either save our marriage or become the final nail in its coffin. Tell me about the neighborhood, I said, breaking the silence. It's called Heathcote, David said, his voice warming as he talked about something he'd obviously researched thoroughly. The elementary school is rated 9 out of 10, and it's only a 6-minute walk from the house. There's a community pool that Tommy would love, and they have this annual block party every 4th of July, where all the neighbors bring food and the kids run around with sparklers. How long have you been looking at this house? 3 weeks. I've driven by it probably 20 times, talked to the neighbors, researched the property taxes, checked the crime statistics. Sarah, I know this seems impulsive, but I've done my homework. Your homework doesn't include talking to your wife about spending our life savings. My separated wife, who's been living with her sister for 8 months and hasn't given me any indication that she wants to try working things out. The comment stung because it wasn't entirely unfair. I had been living with Lisa, and I had been keeping David at arm's length, treating our separation like a trial period for divorce rather than a genuine attempt to heal our relationship. But that didn't give him the right to make unilateral decisions about our future. The house was on a tree-lined street that looked like a Norman Rockwell painting. Even in the dark, I could see that the neighborhood was well maintained. The kind of place where people knew their neighbors and kids still played outside until dinner time. Mature oak trees lined the sidewalks, their bare winter branches creating a canopy that would be gorgeous in spring. The houses were all different styles, colonials, capes, Tudors, but they seemed to belong together, like a community that had grown organically over decades rather than being developed all at once. David pulled into the driveway of a house that was exactly as beautiful as the photos had suggested. The exterior was painted a soft gray with white trim. And there were window boxes under the front windows that would be perfect for flowers in spring. A stone walkway led to a front porch with room for chairs and maybe a small table. It was the kind of house I'd dreamed about when we'd first gotten married, the kind of place I'd imagined raising children and hosting family holidays. "This is it," he said softly. We sat in the car for a moment, both of us looking at this house that could either be our salvation or the final disaster of our marriage. My phone showed 11:53 p.m. "Come on," I said. "Show me what you bought us." The key turned easily in the front door, and David flipped on the lights to reveal a living room that took my breath away. The previous owners had clearly loved this place. The hardwood floors were polished to a warm glow. The windows were framed with built-in bookshelves, and there was a fireplace with a mantel that looked like it had hosted decades of family Christmas mornings. The ceilings were higher than in our old house, and the rooms felt both spacious and cozy, the kind of place where you could imagine growing old. "Tommy would love this," I whispered, imagining our son racing through these rooms, his laughter echoing off the high ceilings. David led me through the house, pointing out details like a proud tour guide who was also terrified he was about to be fired. The kitchen had been updated but kept its vintage charm subway tiles, butcher block counters, and enough space for both of us to cook without bumping into each other. There was a breakfast nook with built-in seating that would be perfect for Tommy's homework or family game nights. The master bedroom was on the first floor, with French doors that opened onto the backyard and enough space for the king-size bed we'd bought for our 10th anniversary, but had barely slept in together since. Upstairs, there were 3 more bedrooms, including one that was clearly meant to be a child's room, with built-in shelves and a window seat overlooking the garden. I could picture Tommy here, reading his chapter books in the natural light, maybe doing art projects at a desk under the slanted ceiling. The other bedrooms could be offices, guest rooms, whatever we needed them to be. "There's something else," David said, leading me to the basement, the workshop I mentioned. The basement had been partially finished, with good lighting, ventilation, and enough space for serious woodworking. I could see David down here, finally pursuing the hobby he'd talked about since college, but never had space for. He'd always said he wanted to build Tommy a treehouse, teach him how to use tools, create something beautiful with his hands instead of spending all day staring at spreadsheets and client presentations. My phone buzzed. 11:57 p.m. "Sarah," David said, and his voice was different now, smaller, more vulnerable. "I know I screwed up. I know I should have talked to you first, but I've been living in that apartment for 8 months, watching Tommy pack his little suitcase every week, seeing him try to figure out which parent he's supposed to love more on any given day. And when I saw this place, I could picture us being a family again. Not the way we were, I know we can't go back to that, but maybe a better version. Maybe the version we always had the potential to be, but were too scared or stubborn to become." I looked around the basement, imagining the workshop David would never build if I stopped this transfer. I thought about Tommy, growing up in a world divided between 2 inadequate housing situations. I thought about the 8 months of intentional space that had mostly just felt like intentional loneliness. I thought about the couples who managed to work through their problems without separating, who found ways to grow together instead of apart. But I also thought about trust, about partnership, about the basic respect that should exist between 2 people trying to raise a child together. David had violated all of that with his unilateral decision, no matter how beautiful his intentions were. 11:58 p.m. "I need to call the bank," I said. David's face fell. "To stop the transfer? To talk to them about our options? To understand exactly what we're dealing with here?" I dialed the customer service line, praying someone would be available this close to midnight on Christmas Eve. After 3 minutes of hold music, ironically, Silent Night, a tired-sounding representative picked up. "First National Bank, this is Jennifer. How can I help you tonight?" "Hi, this is Sarah Chun. I have a joint account ending in 4762, and there's a pending wire transfer that I need to discuss. I'm one of the account holders, but I wasn't consulted about this transfer. Let me pull up your account." "Okay, I see the pending transfer for $47,000. It's scheduled to complete at 11:59 p.m. tonight. Since you're both authorized on the account, either party can initiate transfers without the other's explicit approval. However, if you want to stop this transfer, I can place a fraud hold on the account right now. 11:59 p.m. If I place the fraud hold, what happens to the money David has already committed for this house purchase? Well, if the transfer doesn't complete tonight, the buyer would likely be in breach of contract with the seller. Depending on the terms of the purchase agreement, he could lose his earnest money deposit and potentially be sued for damages. I looked at David, who was staring at me with a mixture of hope and terror. In 60 seconds, either our money would be gone, committed to a house and a future I hadn't chosen, or David would lose his deposit and face legal consequences for a decision he'd made out of love and desperation. Ma'am, I need a decision. It's 11:59. How much was the earnest money deposit? I asked David. $5,000, he whispered. And if I can't complete the purchase, I could be liable for the difference between the selling price and what they'd get if they have to relist the property. The customer service representative was still on the line. Ma'am, I have about 30 seconds before this transfer auto-completes. What would you like to do? I closed my eyes and saw Tommy's face when he'd asked why I was there. Not confused or upset, just curious. Like maybe, deep down, he'd been hoping I would show up. Like maybe the careful division of our lives wasn't actually making anyone happier or healthier. I thought about the workshop in the basement, about the backyard where Tommy could finally have the swing set we'd been promising him for 3 years. I thought about David, imperfect and impulsive, but sitting in that sterile apartment for 8 months, planning what he hoped would be a Christmas miracle. And I thought about the fact that sometimes love looks like forgiveness, and sometimes it looks like taking a leap of faith into something that might be better than what you're leaving behind. But mostly, I thought about trust, about whether I could trust David to make better decisions in the future if I trusted him with this decision now, about whether he deserved the chance to prove that his heart was in the right place, even if his methods were completely wrong. Let the transfer go through, I said. Sarah, David started. But, I continued, we're going to need to have some very serious conversations about how decisions get made in this family. And David, if this doesn't work out, if we can't figure out how to be better partners to each other, you're going to buy out my half of this house at market value. The representative confirmed that the transfer had completed at exactly midnight. Christmas Day had arrived, and with it, a house that would either save our marriage or become the most expensive mistake we'd ever made together. David was quiet for a long moment, then said, I know I don't deserve it, but thank you for trusting me, for trusting us. I'm not sure I'm trusting us yet, I said, but I'm willing to try, on one condition. Anything. We start couples therapy again. Real therapy, not just the monthly check-ins we were doing before. And we commit to actually doing the work, not just showing up and going through the motions. Already found a therapist, Dr. Martinez. Tommy's friend Jake's parents see her, and they said she saved their marriage. I laughed despite myself. You've been planning this for a while, haven't you? I've been hoping for it since the day I moved out. We drove back to the apartment in comfortable silence. It was after 1 a.m. when we got back, and Tommy was still sleeping soundly, one arm wrapped around the stuffed elephant he'd had since he was 3. I sat on David's couch, our couch now, I supposed, and tried to process what had just happened. So what now? I asked. Now we go home. All of us. We spend Christmas morning in our new house, and we start figuring out how to be a family again. And if it doesn't work, if we end up making each other miserable again, then at least Tommy will have had one more Christmas where his parents were together. And we'll have tried something brave instead of just managing our disappointment from a safe distance. I stayed that night, sleeping on the couch while David took the floor. In the morning, Tommy woke up to find both his parents making Christmas pancakes together, laughing over David's attempt to flip one that was clearly too big for the pan. We told him about the house over breakfast, watching his face light up as David showed him pictures of his new bedroom and the backyard. Does this mean you're not getting divorced? Tommy asked, with the directness that 8-year-olds are famous for. It means we're going to try something new, I said. We're going to try being roommates who are also your parents and see if we can remember how to be friends again. And maybe more than friends eventually, Tommy pressed. David and I looked at each other across the breakfast table. Maybe, David said, if we can learn how to talk to each other better. And if Dad learns to ask Mom before spending all our money on houses, I added, ruffling David's hair. Tommy giggled. Dad, you're in trouble. Yeah, David said, grinning at me, but maybe it was worth it. We moved into the house that afternoon, carrying boxes and Christmas presents and all the complicated hopes of a family trying to rebuild itself from the ground up. Mrs. Patterson helped carry Tommy's gifts to the car, shaking her head and muttering about young people and their dramatic Christmas surprises. The movers David had hired wouldn't come until the day after Christmas, but we brought our immediate necessities and enough to make the house feel like home for our first night. The house felt different in daylight, bigger, more real, full of possibility and terror in equal measure. Tommy immediately claimed the bedroom with the window seat, dragging his favorite stuffed animals upstairs and declaring it the best room he'd ever seen. David and I stood in the kitchen, surrounded by boxes and the chaos of moving day, trying to figure out how to occupy the same space without falling back into old patterns. Ground rules, I said, pulling out a notebook. If we're going to do this, we need structure. Agreed. You first. Weekly family meetings. We discuss schedules, finances, any major decisions that affect all of us. No more surprise purchases, no matter how beautiful the house is. Fair. My turn. We each get veto power over major changes. Paint colors, furniture, anything that affects the shared spaces. We both have to live here, so we both get a say. Tommy gets input on things that affect him directly. His room, his school activities, his schedule. He's old enough to have opinions about his own life, date nights. Not with each other, necessarily, but we each get one night a week to do whatever we want without parenting duties, whether that's going out with friends or just reading a book without interruption. I looked up from my note-taking. You've been thinking about this for a while, haven't you? Every day for 8 months. I made a lot of mistakes in our marriage, Sarah. I don't want to make the same ones again. The first few weeks were awkward, like being teenagers whose parents had remarried and suddenly found themselves sharing a bathroom. We tiptoed around each other, overly polite and careful not to leave messes in the common areas. But slowly, we began to remember why we'd fallen in love in the first place. David turned the basement workshop into a real workspace, spending his weekend mornings sanding and organizing and setting up the tools he'd had in storage since college. Tommy became his eager apprentice, learning about different types of wood and how to measure twice and cut once. On weekends, they would disappear down there for hours, emerging covered in sawdust and proud of whatever birdhouse or bookshelf they'd created together. I set up my home office in the upstairs bedroom that got the best morning light, finally having space to spread out my freelance graphic design work without turning the dining room table into a permanent desk. The natural light was perfect for color work, and having a dedicated space meant I could take on bigger projects, which helped offset the increased cost of our mortgage. We went to therapy every Thursday evening, leaving Tommy with Lisa or Mrs. Patterson. Dr. Martinez was exactly what we needed: warm but no nonsense, skilled at helping us identify the patterns that had led to our separation without dwelling on old resentments. She taught us how to fight fairly, how to ask for what we needed without making demands, how to apologize effectively and mean it. The house was a symptom, not the problem, she said during our third session. David, you bought the house because you felt powerless to fix your marriage through conventional means. Sarah, you almost stopped the transfer because you felt powerless to trust David's decision-making. But power in a marriage isn't about control, it's about partnership. It's about being brave enough to be vulnerable with each other. By Valentine's Day, we'd settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable. David would make coffee in the mornings while I packed Tommy's lunch. I'd handle dinner while David helped with homework. Weekends were family time trips to the hardware store, long walks through the neighborhood, lazy Sunday mornings where we'd all pile onto the couch and watch movies together. We weren't sleeping in the same bedroom yet. That felt too fast, too much like pretending nothing had happened. But sometimes, after Tommy was asleep, We'd sit on the back porch with glasses of wine, talking about everything and nothing the way we used to when we were dating. Do you regret it? David asked one evening in March as we watched the sunset paint the sky pink and orange. Regret what? Letting the transfer go through? All of it. The separation, the drama, moving in together again without really being together, making everything so complicated. I considered the question seriously. Our marriage still wasn't perfect. We still disagreed about money, still had to work at communicating effectively, still needed Dr. Martinez to help us navigate the bigger conflicts. But Tommy was happier, more settled, no longer carrying that careful tension that comes with being a child whose parents are constantly on the verge of falling apart. And David and I were learning how to be partners again, slowly and carefully, without the pressure of trying to recreate something that hadn't been working anyway. I regret how long it took us to figure out what we actually needed from each other, I said finally. But no, I don't regret the house. I don't regret taking the risk, even though I went about it completely wrong, especially because you went about it completely wrong. If you'd asked me rationally, if we'd had meetings and made pros and cons lists, I probably would have said no. I would have been too scared to try something that big, too worried about what would happen if it didn't work out. And now? I looked at the garden David was planning. At the swing set he and Tommy had installed the weekend before, at the workshop light glowing in the basement window. Now I think maybe the best decisions aren't always the most rational ones. Maybe sometimes you have to be willing to mess up spectacularly in order to create space for something better. David reached over and took my hand, the first time he'd done that since before the separation. His palm was calloused from woodworking, warm and familiar and careful. I love you, he said quietly. I never stopped loving you, even when we couldn't figure out how to live together. I love you too, I said, and meant it in a way that felt both old and new. But I also like you again, which is maybe more important. That night, for the first time since Christmas Eve, David and I fell asleep in the same bed, not because we were trying to fix anything or prove anything, but because it felt natural, like coming home after a very long trip. Spring brought new challenges and new growth. Tommy started Little League, and David volunteered to help coach, something he'd never had time for when he was commuting to Manhattan every day. I took on a major rebranding project for a local restaurant chain, work that paid well enough to ease some of the financial pressure we'd been feeling since taking on the larger mortgage. We hosted our first dinner party in April, inviting Lisa's family and some of our old friends who'd been awkwardly navigating our separation for months. It felt strange but wonderful to be entertaining together again, to see our house filled with laughter and conversation. Tommy was proud to show his cousins his room and the treehouse David had started building in the backyard oak tree. You two seem different, Lisa said, helping me clear dishes after dessert. Calmer, maybe. More like yourselves. She was right. The careful politeness that had characterized our last year of marriage was gone, replaced by something more honest and less fragile. We still had arguments about money, about Tommy's screen time, about whose turn it was to deal with the mysterious smell coming from the basement, but we fought like partners now, not like enemies looking for ammunition. Dr. Martinez helped us understand that our separation, painful as it had been, had given us the space to remember who we were as individuals before we tried to figure out who we could be as a couple. David's impulsive house purchase, she said, was actually a sign of progress. He was finally willing to take a risk for our relationship instead of just avoiding conflict. The old David would have researched that house for 6 months and then talked himself out of making an offer. She observed during one of our sessions, the fact that he acted on his feelings, even imperfectly, shows growth. Summer brought Tommy's 9th birthday, and we threw him the party we'd always talked about but never quite. Managed a backyard barbecue with a bounce house and a scavenger hunt that had kids running all over the neighborhood. Watching Tommy blow out his candles, surrounded by friends and family in our own backyard, I felt a contentment I hadn't experienced in years. Best birthday ever, Tommy declared, chocolate cake smeared across his grin. Even better than Chuck E. Cheese? David asked, referencing Tommy's 7th birthday, which had been a logistical nightmare of arcade games and birthday party chaos. Way better, because everyone I love is here. Later that night, after the guests had gone home and Tommy was asleep, David and I sat on the back porch watching fireflies dance across our garden. He's right, you know, David said. Everyone he loves is here. In one place. That's what I was trying to create when I bought this house. I know, and I'm grateful, even if I wish you'd found a way to include me in the decision. What if I told you I have another confession to make? My stomach tightened. What kind of confession? I've been looking at engagement rings. I stared at him. Engagement rings? David, we're already married. I know, but I want to propose to you again, properly this time. I want to ask you to marry me knowing who we both really are, knowing what we're capable of breaking and what we're capable of fixing. The idea was both ridiculous and perfect. We'd been married for 12 years, had been through separation and reconciliation, owned a house together and shared custody schedules and joint therapy sessions. But we'd never chosen each other as the people we'd become. Show me the ring, I said. David pulled out his phone and showed me a picture of a simple band with a small emerald, my birthstone, not a diamond. It was nothing like the traditional engagement ring he'd given me when we were 25 and thought love was enough to solve any problem. It's beautiful, I said, but I have a condition. What's that? I get to propose to you too. 6 months later, Tommy asked if we were getting remarried. We never actually got divorced, I reminded him, laughing at his serious expression. Yeah, but are you going to have another wedding? Like a party where everyone knows you're happy again? David and I looked at each other across the dinner table we'd built together from reclaimed wood. David had found at a salvage yard. Our marriage wasn't the same as it had been before. It was more honest, more intentional, built on a foundation of mutual respect rather than just love and hope. Maybe, David said. Would you want that? A party where we celebrate our family being back together? Can I wear a tuxedo? You can wear whatever you want, buddy. And can we have the party in our backyard? With lights and all the trees? I imagined our friends and family gathered under the oak tree where David had hung the swing, celebrating not the beginning of our relationship, but the hard work of rebuilding it into something stronger. It sounded perfect. I think that sounds like exactly the right kind of party, I said. That fall, David proposed to me on the anniversary of the day we'd first looked at the house together. He'd set up a picnic in the backyard, complete with fairy lights strung through the trees and all of Tommy's favorite foods. When he got down on one knee, Tommy was hiding behind the garden shed with a camera, documenting what he'd later describe as the most romantic thing ever. 2 weeks later, I proposed to David in the basement workshop, interrupting his work on a bookshelf to ask if he wanted to spend the rest of his life building things together. He said yes with sawdust in his hair and tears in his eyes. And so, on Christmas Eve 2024, exactly 1 year after David's impulsive, terrifying, life-changing decision to buy us a house, we renewed our vows in our backyard, surrounded by people who had supported us through our separation and welcomed us back into couplehood with relief and joy. Tommy wore a tiny tuxedo and served as both ring bearer and best man. David's vows included a promise to never again make major financial decisions without consulting me first, unless it's something really, really important like saving a puppy or buying ice cream. My vows included a promise to trust his good intentions even when his methods were questionable, and to always remember that sometimes the scariest choice is also the right one. Dr. Martinez officiated, reminding everyone present that marriage isn't just about love, it's about choosing to be brave together. Again and again, especially when the easy thing would be to give up. Sarah and David's story reminds us that sometimes we have to break something completely before we can rebuild it properly, she said. They didn't just find their way back to each other, they found their way forward to something better. As we danced our first dance as a reunited couple to the same song we'd chosen for our original wedding 12 years earlier, David whispered in my ear, "Thank you for not stopping that transfer." "Thank you for being brave enough to risk everything," I whispered back. The party lasted until nearly midnight, with Tommy finally falling asleep on a blanket under the fairy lights while the adults continued celebrating around him. Later, After the guests had gone home and we'd carried our son up to his room with the window seat, he still declared the best room in the world. David and I sat on our back porch, watching the lights twinkle in the trees. "So what's next?" David asked. "Any more life-changing financial surprises you're planning to spring on me?" I laughed, curling up against his side. "Actually, I was thinking we might want to start saving for Tommy's college fund. You know, the responsible, boring kind of financial planning where we both participate in the decision-making process." "Sounds revolutionary," David said, kissing the top of my head. "I love it. And maybe," I said, "we should start thinking about whether Tommy might want a little brother or sister." David was quiet for a moment. "Are you serious? I'm 37, you're 39. If we're going to do it, we should probably decide soon." "What does Tommy think?" "I haven't asked him yet. I wanted to talk to you first. You know, like mature adults who make major life decisions together." David laughed. "What a novel concept." We sat in comfortable silence, both of us imagining our family growing, our house filling with even more chaos and love. The workshop in the basement would need to be converted to a nursery, and we'd probably need to add on to the house within a few years. More decisions, more risks, more opportunities to choose each other and our family over the safer, easier alternatives. "Yes," David said finally. "If you want another baby, if you want to take that risk with me, then yes. Absolutely yes." Even though babies are expensive and exhausting and completely unpredictable, especially because of that, I'm pretty sure the best things in life are expensive and exhausting and completely unpredictable. 6 months later, I was pregnant with our daughter, Emma, who would be born the following December, another Christmas surprise, though a much more welcome one than a midnight wire transfer. Tommy was thrilled to become a big brother, already planning all the things he would teach his little sister about their house, their neighborhood, their family. "I'm going to show her the secret hiding spot in the basement," he announced during one of our family meetings, "and teach her how to use Dad's tools when she's old enough, and make sure she knows that this is the best house in the whole world because Mom and Dad chose it together." "Well, Dad chose it and Mom decided not to stop him," I corrected. "Same thing," Tommy said with the confidence of a 9-year-old who'd watched his parents rebuild their marriage from the ground up. "You both chose to stay together. That's what matters." Sometimes the best gifts come wrapped in crisis, tied with a bow made of trust and faith and the willingness to take a leap into something unknown. Our house, our home stands as proof that sometimes the most impulsive decisions are also the bravest ones. And that love, when combined with hard work and professional help, can build something beautiful from the wreckage of what came before. Christmas Eve will always be the anniversary of the night our marriage was reborn, not through grand romantic gestures or perfect communication, but through a phone call at midnight and the decision to trust each other with our shared future, even when, especially when we had no guarantee of how it would turn out. The house that David bought without asking became the foundation for the family we built by choosing each other every day. It taught us that sometimes love looks like forgiveness. Sometimes it looks like a wire transfer at 11:59 p.m. on Christmas Eve. And sometimes it looks like the courage to build something new on the foundation of something broken. Tommy, now 10 years old, sometimes tells people that his dad bought their house for Christmas, which isn't technically accurate but captures something essential about the spirit of David's decision. He bought us the possibility of home, the chance to be a family in a place that belonged to all of us. The rest, the love, the trust, the daily work of choosing each other, that we had to build ourselves. And we did. If you've ever stood at a crossroads in your own relationship, wondering whether to fight for something imperfect or let it go for something safer, I hope our story reminds you that sometimes the scariest choice is also the one that leads home. Sometimes love looks like forgiveness, and sometimes it looks like a wire transfer at 11:59 p.m. on Christmas Eve, and sometimes it looks like the courage to build something new on the foundation of something broken. What would you have done in that moment? Would you have stopped the transfer? Or would you have taken the leap into an uncertain but hopeful future? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real stories about the messy, complicated, beautiful work of being human. Remember, the best love stories aren't about perfection. They're about two imperfect people choosing to be brave together, one decision at a time. And sometimes, the most important decisions happen at midnight on Christmas Eve, when you have 30 minutes to choose between protecting what you have and risking everything for what you might become.